recording the floor. All right, let's start that over again. Good morning, everybody. This is Business Law. My name is Tom Tebow. I'm going to be the instructor for the course. This is, I think, the start of the 6th year that I've been doing this. And so hopefully we try to learn a little bit every time and make it a little bit better. So hopefully we'll feel the benefit of me having done it for a few years, but we'll see. I am teaching at CSU just as a part-time adjunct position. My real job, my day job, I guess, is that I'm a practicing attorney here in Columbus. My office is downtown, and I've been doing that for, gosh, I think I'm going into my 24th year now. And so because of that, I don't have an office here, but that doesn't mean I don't have office hours. My office is just going to be downtown. I know that may be inconvenient for some of you, so I'm glad to set up Zoom meetings with you or telephone at any time. But if you feel like there's some reason that you need to sit down with me in person, you can either come down to my office, or I'll be glad to just stay after class or come early before class to meet with you. That's not going to be a problem. I don't want you to feel like you don't have access to your professor just because I don't have an office here on campus. Along those same lines, the best way to contact me is by my personal email. I do check my CSU email, I just don't check it as often as the other. And so you'll see in the syllabus what my personal email is. I usually just recommend, if you're going to email me, you're welcome to copy both my personal address and my CSU address. But if you want to just get straight to me fast, just use my personal one. You're also welcome to text me, and my cell phone number is in the syllabus as well. So that's always acceptable if you want to shoot me a text anytime. So just some basics about the class. I do have an attendance policy, and I will admit to you that this is very hypocritical of me, because when I was a college student, I felt very strongly that it was my right whether or not to come to class, and if I could make a good grade without coming to class, that the teacher shouldn't be worried about it. But now that I'm a professor, and we're having class at 8 a.m., my feeling is that if I'm going to be here, you should be too. And so we do have an attendance policy. The other reason I do that's not just to be a jerk, but I do know that there is a very strong correlation between coming to class and doing well in the class. The other reason that I do it is we're not using a textbook anymore in this class. So everything that we cover is covered here. So if you don't come to class, there's not really going to be any good way for you to know what it is that you're expected to know or that you're going to be tested on. So for those reasons, we've got an attendance policy. I do recognize that we're still in the middle of a pandemic, so I'm very sympathetic to that. If anybody has COVID, or if you have family members that have COVID or things like that, just let me know. I'm not going to kick anybody out of the class for reasons like that. But my policy is this. So for the duration of the semester, COVID excluded, you have 4 absences. You can use them however you want. So I don't really I don't differentiate between excused and non-excused. They're just all yours to do whatever you want with. But after the 4th absence, then you'll be dropped from the class. So it's not as if you have 4, and then after 4, if you're sick or when grandmama dies and all that, that those will be excused. You just have 4 absences, and use them however you want. You don't have to let me know along those same lines. If you're sick or if you have something come up, if you're still within your 4, you do not have to text me or email me to let me know you're not coming. Because it doesn't matter whether it's excused or unexcused. It's just if you're not here, I'll just assume that you've got a good reason, or not a good reason, but they're yours to use however you want. I just mentioned that we're not having a textbook. This is the first time I've done this, and I think that I'm going to be really glad that we're doing it this way. I think you're going to be really glad that we're doing it this way, but the reason I made the decision to go without a textbook is that students told me over and over, we're not going to read the textbook. And so I tried some things to try to encourage or incentivize students to read the textbook, but they still said, Professor Thibault, we're not getting rid of the textbook. So I'm getting rid of the textbook. And when we did have a book, one of the things that I was doing to try to get you to read was to give quizzes over the text. But then I found out and realized that, all these quiz questions that I'm using from the test bank are online, and so people can just look those up anyway, and so that still wasn't going to make them read. So there's plenty of good content and material for us to use without having a textbook. This is, I hope that you will find an interesting class. As we talk about current events, we have lots of what about this or what about that. We study a lot of cases that are in the news. And so I feel like that doing it this way, hopefully you'll learn more and you'll be more interested and more invested. So we'll see how that goes. But there is no textbook that anybody needs to worry about for this class. The subject of law is incredibly broad. I'd like to kind of liken it to if you were to take a class on medicine. Think about all the different disciplines there are within medicine. You have cancer doctors, you have foot doctors, you have eye doctors, ear doctors. Law is the same way. There are many, many different disciplines within the subject of law that don't really have a lot to do with each other. You have corporate lawyers that worry about contracts and things like that all day. You have trial lawyers that are in the courtroom all day, and those are two totally different jobs, two totally different areas of the law. So just like you would not go to an eye doctor if you had a problem with your foot, that kind of works the same way in the law. You would not, if you needed to get a divorce, you would not go see a corporate lawyer. You would not go see a tax lawyer, things like that. You'd go find a divorce lawyer. So trying to cram all of the different areas of the law that are pertinent to the business world into one class, we obviously can't do that. Law schools, if you go to law school and you take criminal law, that's a whole year. If you go take contract law, that's a whole year. So we're going to spend 1 week, which is basically 2 classes on criminal law, 2 classes on contract law. And the point is, for this class, is not to teach you the law. Nobody can memorize what it is. The law is going to differ anyway from state to state. It's going to differ sometimes from city to city. And so we're not here to teach you what the law is. What I want you to get out of this class is to understand and appreciate basic principles of the law, so that when you encounter a situation in your jobs, you will think to yourself, oh, this is a contract law issue. And I remember that there are these issues that come up with contract law, and we might have a problem here, and I might need to talk to our company lawyer, or we might need to go get some legal counsel to give us some advice on this. Also, hopefully, so that you will recognize some issues and you'll remember, even though you don't know the specific law on it, this is something I don't want to do. This is not something we're going to get into. So that's really more the point of this class, is really to give you an overview, all of these different areas of the law that will impact what you do on a daily basis in your jobs. So that's one thing that we're going to do. The other thing that we're going to do, and we try to do this through discussion, is that I want you to appreciate by the end of the semester that nothing in the law is really black and white, okay? Almost always there's 2 sides to an issue. So that is going to be helpful to you in your careers if you can spot an issue and think to yourself, okay, this is a contract issue. Let me look at this from both sides. Or this is an employment law issue. Let me look at this from both sides. And by doing that, you'll better be able to evaluate what your options are and what choices you need to make if you can see things from many different perspectives. So we're going to do that too. You'll find me often asking you, okay, who can make the argument on the other side? What's the response to that? And we do that just as an exercise. Doesn't mean that you're only allowed in this class to argue for the position that you believe in. I want you to learn to argue the other side, even when it's not the position that you might believe in. This is how the weeks are going to work. So our weeks are going to start on Tuesday mornings at 12:01 a.m. and then they'll end the following Monday night at 11:59 p.m. So all of the assignments that I give for, let's just take this week, starts today, it ends next Monday, right before midnight. So any assignments that we give this week will be due next Monday at midnight. Do that for a couple reasons. One is I want you to do the assignments while they're fresh in your mind. That helps me with grading so that I don't get flooded with a bunch of papers at the end of the year, and so you don't get behind either. Grading papers can be an issue for me, and so I admit that to you up front, so I like to have it, you know, the sooner y'all can get them in, the sooner I can turn them around and get them back to you. We're gonna do, as far as, you know, how you'll be graded and assessed, you'll have at least one assignment every week. It's gonna be based on what we discuss in class and some reading that I assign to you, which is another reason to come to class. But the way I wanna kind of set this up is that on Tuesdays, I'm gonna try to lecture and introduce that week's topic to you. And then on Thursdays, we'll turn around and discuss what I've assigned you to read, and some of the other activities that we've assigned to try to help working through learning. So Tuesdays are gonna be lecture, Thursdays will be mostly discussion. Some topics we're gonna spend 2 weeks on, so obviously we'll change up a little bit on that, but that's basically how it's gonna work. On Cougar View, and I apologize, I didn't get this up till late yesterday afternoon because it was down. It wasn't working for me yesterday. Is it down for you too? All right, good, that wasn't just me. I'm also not very good with Cougar View. But every week we'll have a different module for that week, and you'll see in the module, in the introduction up top, it'll tell you what the week is, what your assigned readings are, what the assignments are, and then anything that you're assigned will be posted to that module. So, for example, this week you have 3 assigned readings. One is a Supreme Court case, one is a little review of the Bill of Rights, and then one is a chapter outline. And so when you come on Thursday, I want you to have read those 3 things, and they're not long. It probably won't take you more than 45 minutes at the most. Do read, because I will call them, and nobody wants to be, be unprepared. Sometimes I'll ask for volunteers. If you want to say, I may say, who wants to take this case to help me discuss that, but most of the time I'll be calling them. So I do feel like if we're not going to have a textbook and I'm cutting way back on your reading, that the trade-off for that is that you'll come to class on Thursdays having read what was assigned. There's not a participation grade necessarily that goes with that. There's not a grade if I call on you and you're not prepared, but I will tell you that it does make a difference when I'm looking at final grades. If somebody has, an 88 or an 87 or an 89, and they have been prepared when I've called on them, and they've participated in class discussion, that does make a big difference to professors. So, and in particular in me. Let's see. I think I mentioned I'll be posting the lecture videos on our weekly module, so if you do have to miss class for whatever reason, you can watch those and feel caught up. I haven't decided exactly how the grading scheme's gonna work, since we're not doing weekly quizzes off the textbook and everything. In the past, I kinda had like 45%, 40% assignments, 45 quizzes, and then 1 exam. So I don't really know how I'm gonna do that yet, but I do know that your grade will consist of all your assignments, and then we'll have a final exam. So I just haven't decided how much to weight the final exam yet, but I'll let you know that as we go through. There is a discussion question that is posted in the discussion forums every week. That I do give you one assignment grade for the discussions. So what I'll do at the end of the semester is I'll just go through and count if you responded to every single discussion question, that's 100. If you missed a week, then I'll count back from there. But those are important ways that maybe there's something that I want to ask you, or maybe there's a point that I want to drive home and we couldn't cover it in class, or it's something that would have taken too long in class or something. They're very short. This week's discussion question is just for you to introduce yourself, tell me where you're from, what your major is, and what your plans are. And that'll just help me and help everybody else in here kind of know who you are. And, you know, as I'm calling on people, I like to know your backgrounds, because then I have maybe certain questions that are appropriate for you based on what you do and where you're from. Okay, this is a big issue for me, but I think that we're going to have solved this by having no textbook and doing the class the way we're going to do it this semester. Do not cheat. If you cheat, I will fail you and drop you. I had 9 students, and I don't want everybody to be like, this guy is a dick. I had 9 students that I failed last semester for cheating, but it was because they turned in an assignment and they had copied everything from somebody had posted something to chegg.com, and then 9 people had gone and downloaded that and then just copied the answers in. And I don't return my assignments to you with the answers. I don't give you the answer key, so there's nothing out there that would have my answers on it. So whoever posted this to Chegg, every answer was wrong. I don't know if they were trolling everybody or trying to screw people over, but if that was their goal, they did a great job of it. So the people that cheated, not only did they cheat, but every answer that they put on their cheated assignment was wrong. So they would have gotten a 0 either way. But I take that very seriously. And again, that just goes back to, if I'm going to stand up here and teach this class, then I want to make sure that, you know, you guys are doing your own work. And it's not a huge problem. That's the first time I've ever had anything remotely like that. I'm not sure I've failed anybody for cheating in the last 3 years. And so that just happened to be, I'm not sure exactly how that came down. But so let that be a warning. There's nothing on chegg.com that's going to help you in this class. And there's really nothing on the internet that's going to help you, because the questions that I'm asking you on your assignments, they're coming from the reading that I've assigned, and I'm making up the questions. So, you know, being able to copy a question into the Google search, that just isn't going to get you anywhere. And it's obvious to me when an answer is from the internet versus what I'm teaching in class. So hopefully that's the last time we'll ever have to mention that in class for the semester. If you have an issue with something schedule-wise, some of you work and you're here in the 8 o'clock class because that is convenient for your work schedule. You might travel for work, you might have a big meeting, you might know that you're going to be out of town for a family obligation. That's fine as long as you're within your absences, but let me know ahead of time if you have any issues that come up like that, because I'm glad to work with you on that kind of stuff. You know, for example, if you are like, I'm traveling for work that week, and I need, you know, an extra day or an extra couple days on an assignment or something, I'm very glad to be flexible with you on that. But what I don't like is that when people come after the fact and need accommodations. You know, I need an extra day, or it gets to be 11:30 on Monday night, and then, you know, something is wrong. And so that's much less likely to be sympathetic or accommodating to somebody who waits to the last minute than I am for somebody who plans ahead of time. Y'all know also that that it shows, it timestamps when you submit your stuff. Y'all probably already knew that. But it's always funny to me go and look, and because I would have been somebody submitting at 11:59 on Monday nights. So I'm not casting aspersions on anybody who does that, but it's just interesting to me that we can see that. So the last thing I'll say before we jump into the first topic is that I think without a textbook and without anything else to fall back on, it's going to be critical that you take good notes. So for those purposes, I post every week to our module an outline of my lecture. So you can use that to pull up on your laptop or on your tablet. You can print it out if you're a person who'd rather handwrite, and you can use that as we go through the lecture. I'm going to follow that pretty closely, and that will help you with taking notes. I also think that it's a good idea. That's one of the things that I put under the assigned reading category, because I think it's a good thing for you to have read as well. It reinforces what the lecture was, and if you read it ahead of time, you'll already be familiar with some of the things we're talking about. But That is there for your benefit. And then if we get to the end of the semester and we're talking about studying for an exam or something, if you don't have notes, it's gonna be really, really hard for you to go back and try to remember something that happened in week 1 or week 2 or week 3. All right. One calendar note is that I'm gonna be gone the week of my spring break, which is March 29th and 31st, we will not have in-person class. We won't have lecture class either. There may be an assignment or project or something that week, but just know those 2 days we will not have class. And of course, we won't have any assignments during your spring break either, but that'll be an extra week that we may just use to catch up or something. Okay, any questions from anybody before we jump into topics? Okay, good deal. Y'all feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm fine with raising hands or hollering out to me. Some people, I know y'all are used to calling your professors doctor, but I'm not a doctor, so you can call me Tom, or you can call me Professor Tebow or Mr. Tebow, whatever you want to call me is fine. But I am most certainly not a doctor. All right, the first topic and the first kind of module for this week should be a review for you of your high school civics class. The topic is sources of American law. So we're going to talk very broadly about the different categories of law, where those come from, how they differ, and you'll remember from high school civics the idea of federalism, that we have this federal government that is over everyone in the country, and then we've got also a system of state government that in turn imposes their own laws on the people that live in their state and do business in their state. And so we're set up that way with the federal government having 3 branches of law. Y'all remember that: executive branch, judicial branch, and legislative branch. Most states are set up that way as well. I don't feel like we need to spend a whole lot of time on that, because that should be something that is second nature to you now. While we're talking about the federal government, so I should have mentioned this in the beginning. I love discussion. We're going to have tons of discussion and debate. All that's great. One thing that I do stay away from is politics. I just melt down, because I will tell you that I can't handle it. I just can't handle it anymore. I'm not coming at that from either side. I've decided that they all discuss me, and I don't identify with any political party, and they can all go jump in the Potomac River for all I care. I think I just talked about politics, which I just said we're not going to do. But so let's try to keep that part out of it, and we'll be respectful of anybody's opinions. But that kind of stuff, I think, will sidetrack us and lead us to nowhere. If I've learned anything about public discourse in our country the last few years, it's that it seems impossible, unfortunately, to have intelligent conversations about things like that. I really don't think we don't get into that very much, but I just want to throw that out there from the beginning, that I won't be preaching any political views to you, and we'll just try to steer clear of all that. All right, so back to where we were coming from. Sources of American law. So we're going to talk about 5 different sources of American law. Constitutional law, statutory law, and I'm going to go through these in a minute, so don't worry about getting them all. Constitutional law, statutory law, administrative law, and case law / the common law doctrine. Those could be 4 and 5, but I kind of lump them into one. So constitutional law is obviously the law that is established by a constitution, either the federal government constitution or each state has their own constitution as well. Obviously, the federal constitution, the U.S. Constitution, is the supreme law of the land. No state, no other law could conflict with the Constitution. What do we call something that conflicts with the Constitution? That'd be unconstitutional. So when you hear that, that means that it runs afoul of the Constitution. We're going to look at some Supreme Court cases throughout the course, and you've actually got a landmark Supreme Court case for this week, which is Brown versus Board of Education, which you'll hopefully remember was the Supreme Court case that ended segregation in schools. And we're looking at that this week just to, because it's a case that's easy to comprehend what the issues are. It's an important one in our history, and it is a case that overturned years and years and years of established law. So part of what we're gonna see in that is how the Supreme Court can change constitutional law over time. Statutory law is any law that's enacted by a body that is created to make laws. So that sounds a little funny, but think about it this way. The legislative branch of government, in the federal level, that's Congress. Congress is created to make laws. That's the purpose of the legislative branch. So any law that they make is a statute. So I'm going to have on Thursday, we're going to look at some examples of statutes, both from the U.S., from the United States Congress and from the Georgia State Legislature. So similar to Congress, if a state legislature makes a law, that is a statute as well. Can anybody think about an example of a statute? So an example of a Georgia statute would be, I like to wander, but I gotta be careful about wandering because I'm on the dang camera. An example of a Georgia state law, a statute, would be the legislature passing a law that says that you have to have a concealed, if you're gonna carry a concealed weapon, you have to get a permit. So you won't find that rule or that law in the U.S. Constitution. You won't find that. It's not a law that Congress made. You won't find it in the Georgia Constitution. That's a law that the Georgia State Legislature passed. So that would be a statute. And again, I'll show you some examples of that. But statutes are not just limited to Congress or state legislatures. Statutes could also be from city council or a county commissioners. So if you think about units of government that are smaller than each state government, they also pass laws, and those would be statutes as well. All of these things that we're talking about are law. They're just law in different ways. So to further kind of get into the contrast between constitutional law and statutory law, courts, the Supreme Court, state courts, they don't make law in the sense that they don't decide, let's take the concealed weapon carry permit for a second. The Supreme Court of Georgia can't say, we think that citizens should not have to get permits for that. So we're just going to pronounce this law that that you no longer have to have a permit to carry a concealed weapon. They can't make law on their own. The courts make law by interpreting other laws. And so that is a segue into what we call common law or case law. And that works like this. Think back, and I'm not good with history, so I don't know how many years, but back into the English tradition, before this country was even explored. They didn't have a written books of laws like we do now, because that just wasn't something that was possible then. It wasn't something that was possible to compile and print and then distribute to everybody. It just wasn't something they were able to do. So in order to create uniformity, the judges would share their opinions with each other, and they would try to follow decisions made by other judges when that same issue or that same controversy came up in their court. And so that was called the common law tradition. So you might have had way back, and again, I could be historically way off, but way back in old times, you might have a dispute between two landowners over who owned a parcel of land, and they go see a judge, probably had one of those long fruity wigs on, the big white curly wigs, and a robe or something. And that judge would try to apply principles of deciding property ownership disputes that other judges in England had done so that they would be consistent. And so over time, even though you might not be able to open up a book and point to the law that tells how you solve property line disputes, it became known that this principle of law, this is how we decide who owns piece of property. And over time, that built up and built up and built up, and so that you've got this enormous body of law that was called the English common law. And basically, again, that just meant that whatever your dispute was, it was going to be solved in the same way and under the same principles that similar disputes had been solved in the past. And that makes a lot of sense to us because we don't want a system, no society would want a system where the laws were applied, unevenly. And as I stand here and say that, I smirk a little bit to myself, though. Not that our system of law in America is perfect, and I don't think everybody's experience is that our laws are applied uniformly everywhere. I don't know that you can ever achieve that. But to just have chaos of one judge seeing things this way, another judge seeing things the other way, there would really be no predictability and stability in society if you didn't have some sort of way of trying to make everything, a lot more uniform. Is what I'm looking for. So that's how the English common law system developed. Well, as society, evolved, we did get to the point where we could write down all the laws. So every law that Congress passed, we have those in books now. It's possible to go and open a book and find exactly the law that you're looking for. But the common law tradition lived on in this way. As courts interpreted what the laws meant, then those court decisions became binding on future courts. In the same way that back in the English common law system, judges would use principles from other judges to decide their cases. Now, to this day, courts will use written decisions from other courts to guide how they decide cases today. And that body of law, as you can imagine, is tremendous. If every decision by a court is written down and put in books, which it is, that's a tremendous body of law that we have to guide. It really supplements a statutory law or a constitutional law. So let me give you an example of that. Freedom of speech. We know that we have freedom of speech through the Constitution, right? That's part of one of the rights that we're guaranteed through the Bill of Rights, which we're going to talk about on Thursday. But the First Amendment just says that each citizen shall be guaranteed the right to freedom of speech, right? We know from our own experiences and learning that you cannot yell fire in a crowded theater. We know that you can burn a flag, right? But how do we know? How is that the law? Because that's not in the Constitution. In the First Amendment, it doesn't say you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, but you can burn a flag. You don't find that anywhere in the Constitution. Congress didn't pass a statute on that. So how have we evolved to where we know that our freedom of speech is limited in some ways or not limited in some ways? And that's through case law. That's from courts interpreting the First Amendment. So somewhere along the way, let's take yelling fire in a crowded theater, somebody did that, got arrested for it, and charged with inciting a riot or whatever it was. And that person challenged in court being arrested and charged with that, saying, I have freedom of speech under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And as that went through the court system, the courts then would write an opinion that says, yes, you do have the right to freedom of speech, but the First Amendment of the Constitution does not include the right to yell fire in a crowded theater. Okay, so while you won't find that in the text of the First Amendment, that is the law because it's been written by a court who was interpreting that part of the Constitution. That's maybe an easy one to understand. But courts every day interpret statutory law, they interpret laws that Congress writes, they interpret state laws, and in that way we get, the body of law expands to this whole idea of freedom of speech. Same thing with corporate speech. So it doesn't say in the First Amendment that corporations are people and that corporations have the right to free speech. It just says every citizen is guaranteed the right to free speech. But we now have a body of law through court decisions that says, you know what, that covers corporations too. A corporation, even though it's not a real person, is a fictional person in the sense that it does have the right to speak in the form of advertising or lobbying or contributing to political campaigns and that sort of thing. And in that way, the First Amendment protections are extended to non-live humans. And in that same way, corporate speech is also limited. It doesn't, corporations, just because they are included in the right to free speech does not mean it's unlimited. Corporations are limited, obviously, and we can't have false advertising. We can't have speech that would incite riots or that's misleading or that would endanger the public, things like that. So all of these things that very often the law just is pretty general. The right to free speech is very, very, very general proposition. But the nuts and bolts and the details of what that actually means for humans and corporations has been developed over 200 years by court decisions that interpret that provision. I hope that makes sense to you. Another area of law is administrative law. And this is one that kind of can slide by unnoticed. It's not that it's not the law, but we just don't think of it in this way. So the executive branch of government, we think of that as led by the president, right? But the president and the executive branch, in order to carry out all of their duties, the executive branch forms agencies. So think of the president's cabinet. You've got the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of State, all these other things. And the executive branch has created these agencies to help them carry out the business of administering the law and governing the people. So things like the Environmental Protection Agency, things like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, things like the Internal Revenue Service. All those are government agencies, and we have those on the federal level, and we have them on the state level too. So administrative law comes from rules that these agencies make. So not only do we have a constitution on a federal and state level, we've got statutory law that Congress, state legislatures, and local governments make. We've got case law that courts have established through written opinions. But we also have all these rules that agencies make. And it's a little, I don't know what the word is, but it's just not something we think about often because we think about the three branches of government, and it might seem funny to us sometimes that we could have a law that governs us and our conduct that wasn't found in the Constitution or wasn't passed by Congress or state legislature, right? These are just rules that the IRS makes up. Now, there are guidelines for how they do it, and of course they can't be constitutional, they can't conflict with other laws and that sort of thing, but in the business world, administrative law is everywhere. If you work in any place where you've got manufacturing or anything like that, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, OSHA, they have all kinds of rules that you're subject to. If you go in your break room and you see all these posters on the wall about employee rights and safety rights and all that is administrative law. And you encounter it all the time. So not only do these agencies have the right to make rules that are law, call it rulemaking, agencies make rules, but those rules are law. But they can enforce them too. So if you violate, if your company is putting out wastewater or air, the Environmental Protection Agency has rules about how concentrated the pollutants in the water, the air can be, right? And if you violate that, the Environmental Protection Agency can come after you. So not only do they get to make rules, but they also get to enforce them, and those rules also come with penalties that could include, things like loss of liberty, like jail time for pollution and things like that. So that is another very, very important source of law that we don't think of constitutional law as affecting us on a daily basis much. I mean, we know the basic constitutional provisions, and of course they protect our liberties and that kind of thing. But we're not going into work every day and thinking like, what in the Constitution do I need to be worried about today? That rarely happens. But you do go into work and think about what safety or what are these rules about how I conduct my business that I've got to be worried about. A lot of that is administrative law. So as you might expect, from a subject matter perspective, there's overlap. So it doesn't mean that the Environmental Protection Agency, for example, they're not the only ones that can make law having to do with the environment. Congress can pass as many statutes as they want having to do with the environment. State legislatures could pass rules having to do with the environment. It's not exclusive to each area. So there'll be obviously some good overlap in that. All right, so that was constitutional law, statutory law, administrative law, and then the case law / common law. So let's talk about the idea of, this is another high school civics topic, but a Latin term called stare decisis, and that has a place in our judiciary system, and that is the fancy name for the idea that we talked about already that says that courts should follow precedent set by previous courts. Stare decisis does not mean that a court can never change from precedent, okay? It just means that a court has to have a dang good reason for doing so, and the reason has to be based in sound principles of law. We're going to see that. I'm not going to talk too much about today because you're going to see a great example of that in Brown versus Board of Education, where the court system, up before the case got to the Supreme Court, had followed precedent from prior years that said that the idea of separate but equal was constitutional. So there have been many decisions leading up to Brown versus Education that says that the separate but equal doctrine did not violate the Constitution. Well, the Brown versus Board of Education Court, and you'll see their reasoning said, yeah, that might have been the law up to now, and that might have been the precedent, but we're changing that, and here's why, and they lay out all the reasons. And again, we're going to get into that on Thursday. So I want to talk about kind of different classifications of law, and this is not the same thing as sources of law. Okay, sources of law, where they come from. Classes of law just mean kind of what category a law could fit in. And a law can fit into many different kinds of categories, just like a person can. I fit into the category of a Georgian. I'm from Georgia. I fit into the category of a male. I'm a male. So a certain law could also have, fit into multiple categories as well. The main two ones that I want you to appreciate and understand are the ideas of civil law and criminal law. All right, and the easiest way to keep these straight is that criminal law is a violation of a law that governs our conduct that's punishable by fines or imprisonment or loss of liberty. Okay, and we know that rape, murder, theft, assault, all this, I mean, it's pretty easy to come up with some criminal law. Anything that's not criminal law is civil law. Civil law is everything else, contract disputes, real estate disputes, divorce law, all that kind of thing. That's all civil law. When you have a criminal law case, the state is always, so let me back up for a second. In any case, and we'll talk about this in future weeks, but in any case, you've got at least two parties, right? You've got a plaintiff, that's the party that starts the case, and you've got a defendant, that's the person the case is brought against. In a criminal case, the plaintiff is always either the state or the federal government, depending on which law is being broken. So if it's a federal criminal law, like tax fraud, then if I violated the tax code, or violated federal statutes on taxes, criminal statutes, then my case would be the United States of America versus Tom Tebow. If it's a civil case, then it's between two people or two companies or two non-governmental entities. So if Mr. Baker and I had a car wreck and I rear-ended him on the way into class this morning, that case is going to be Baker versus Tebow, and that's all civil law. Without trying to confuse you too much, the same act can be a violation of a criminal law and civil law at the same time. And I'm not testing you on this, but I do want you to understand this basic principle. So let's say that I rear-ended Mr. Baker this morning coming into class. And so we have a civil case because I've damaged his property, and he is entitled under the law to have me, or my insurance, but have me reimburse him for his injuries and his lost property and all that kind of thing. That's a civil case. But if my rear-ending him was a result of me being drunk off my ass and, having stayed up all night and, drank whatever I drank, then I'm also committed a criminal offense of DUI. So there could also be a separate case against me, state of Georgia versus Tom Tebow, for driving under the influence. So same act, but I've implicated a civil law issue and a criminal law issue. To further complicate things, there are some acts that have the same name under criminal law and civil law. Assault is one of them. So when we hear assault, we typically think of that's a crime, right? I got assaulted downtown, Friday night. Somebody came up behind me and or punched me, and we got into a fight. They punched me in the face, and broke my ribs, and stole my wallet. That's punishable. That violates a criminal law against hitting other people and stealing from them. But there's also a civil version of assault as well that allows somebody to recover from another person even if the state doesn't prosecute or if the person's not charged with the crime. I probably shouldn't have brought that up because that's just confusing, but the overall point that I want you to appreciate is that we do have two big categories of law, criminal law and civil law, and that some acts can be both and some laws can be both as well. No. A law is either a civil law or a criminal law, but the act could implicate a civil law and a criminal law at the same time. I said that wrong. Everybody thoroughly confused on that now? All right. So one of the things we're going to do Thursday is, so be thinking about this now. When we come in, I'm just going to ask you to jot down 3 laws that you know about, just whatever 3 laws come to mind, and then I'm going to ask you to throw some of those out to me, and we're going to talk about, is that constitutional, is it statutory, is it administrative, is that case law, is it civil law, is it criminal law, all those sort of things. And hopefully that'll illustrate it a little bit better. Let me see what else I wanted to cover today. The Bill of Rights I've assigned to you this week, that may seem a little bit weird to be assigning in business law, because that is, again, that's really a high school civics topic. But I think it's a good example of constitutional law, number one, that we can then use to illustrate some of these other points. But I also think it's something that's really important for you all to know. So it's a really easy, it's not hard, it's a really easy thing. Your assignment for this week that I'm gonna post on Thursday is gonna be over the Brown versus Board of Education case, some just basic classification sources of law, and the Bill of Rights. So a lot of what we talk about, for example, when we discuss that Brown versus Board of Education case, a lot of what we talk about is gonna be some of the exact same things that I'm gonna be asking you on the assignment. So again, another good reason to have read it, be prepared, and then take really good notes as we go through that. And you guys you'll get the, I think you'll get the hang of the flow of how this is gonna work pretty quickly. It's not too complicated. Anybody have any questions about anything that we've said today, or anything that's happening Thursday, or in general? No questions. All right, well, then that is all I had for today. I will look forward to seeing everybody at 8 a.m. Class starts at 8 a.m. on Thursday morning.